Are you the type of person who forgets names easily? You just got introduced, and seconds later, the name is already gone. Feels bad, right? Almost embarrassing. But here's the truth. This habit comes with powerful hidden strengths you need to know. No fluff? Let's get into the first one. The utility filter. You meet someone. They look you in the eye, smile, and say, "Hi, I'm Steve." You nod, maybe repeat it once in your head like a responsible adult. "Steve, got it." 2 minutes later, Steve is gone. Not hiding, not loading, just gone. Like your brain hit skip intro and never looked back. And sure, there's that brief moment of internal judgment. Really? You had one job. But pause for a second and look at what actually happened during those 2 minutes. You weren't zoning out. You weren't distracted. You were working. While the conversation was flowing, you were noticing the subtle drop in his tone when he mentioned something uncomfortable. You were reading his expressions, catching micro reactions most people miss. You were sensing whether his energy felt open, guarded, confident, or just slightly off. All of this happened automatically, in the background, without effort. Your brain didn't fail. It prioritized. It made a quiet trade-off. It dropped the label to focus on the signal. Because if you really think about it, names are kind of arbitrary in the moment. Steve doesn't tell you if he's honest. It doesn't tell you if he's insecure, confident, or trying too hard. It doesn't tell you if you should trust him, avoid him, or grab coffee with him. It's just a tag, a placeholder, a social checkbox. Meanwhile, tone, behavior, and authenticity, that's real data. So your brain filters out what doesn't help you understand the situation right now. And that's where your advantage starts to show. You move through conversations with a different kind of awareness. You don't just hear words, you evaluate intention. You don't just see a smile, you check if it's real. You don't just listen, you read. It's like most people are watching the surface of a scene, and you're picking up the subtext, the tension, the hidden cues. That gives you a quiet edge. You can sense when someone's enthusiasm is forced. You notice inconsistencies before they become obvious. You pick up on emotional shifts in real time, like your brain is running a live analysis without asking permission. And in a world where people say one thing and mean another, that skill is incredibly valuable. It helps you avoid bad decisions, read the room faster, and connect on a deeper level when it actually matters. Of course, there's a flip side, because while you're busy understanding people, they're often just hoping you remember their name. And when you don't, it can feel to them like you weren't paying attention at all, like they didn't leave an impression. Which is almost funny in a slightly painful way, because they did leave an impression. You just stored everything except the label. So sometimes your strength gets misunderstood as carelessness. Your depth gets mistaken for distraction. You walk away with a clear read on who they are, while they walk away thinking, "Do they even remember me?" But when you zoom out, the pattern becomes obvious. This isn't about having a bad memory. It's about having a selective one. Your brain is designed to capture meaning, not just information, to focus on what matters, not what's easy to recall. And in that trade-off, you didn't lose something important, you just chose something more useful. The context architect. Have you ever seen someone completely out of the place you know them from, and your brain just freezes for a second? Not a full shutdown, more like a tiny glitch, like your mind is refreshing the page and the Wi-Fi is struggling. Your dentist at the grocery store, your coworker at the gym, that one person from work suddenly walking past you on a beach like they spawned in the wrong map. You know them instantly, there's zero doubt, but at the same time, something feels off. Your brain goes, "Wait, why are you here? This isn't your level." And for a few awkward seconds, you can't even grab their name. It's like the memory is there, but the access point moved. That's not you being forgetful. That's your system working exactly as designed. because you don't store people as isolated data. You don't save Sarah as a neat labeled file sitting in a folder. You store her inside an experience. She's not just Sarah, she's the person I talked to during that long meeting where time stopped existing. She's the one who told that oddly specific story while it was raining. She's the one who always sits in the same chair and somehow makes it her territory. Your brain builds connections, not lists. It ties people to environments, emotions, moments, and tiny details that most people don't even register consciously. It's less like a spreadsheet and more like a movie. And here's where that becomes powerful. When you remember something, you don't just recall a name, you relive a scene. You remember the tone of the room, the feeling in the air, the way the conversation flowed, the subtle expressions that gave everything context. Your memory has texture, it has layers. While most people remember what happened, you remember how it felt and what it meant. That makes your recall richer, more human, and way more useful in real situations. Because life isn't just facts, it's patterns, emotions, and context, and you're naturally wired to capture all of that. It also explains why, once the context clicks back into place, everything returns at once. You see that coworker again, this time near the office, and suddenly name, conversations, impressions, all unlocked like a full download finishing at once. Nothing was lost. It was just waiting for the right trigger. Of course, there's a small catch. When the context changes too much, your brain takes a second to catch up, and in that gap, you might look confused for no reason. Someone might wave at you in a completely different setting, and you hesitate just a little too long. Not because you don't know them, but because your brain is searching for the right scene to load. To them, it might feel like you forgot. To you, it feels like opening the wrong door and realizing you're in the wrong room. But once you find the right one, everything makes sense again. So yes, your memory might lag for a moment when the environment shifts, but in exchange, you get something most people don't. You don't just remember people, you remember stories. And in the long run, that's a much deeper way to understand the world. The dynamic adapter. Put yourself in a new group for a second. A meeting, a party, a team you just joined. People are introducing themselves, shaking hands, throwing names around like confetti. Most people are focused on one thing. Who is who? They're building a mental map. Name, arrow role, arrow title, arrow where they fit. This is John, he's the manager. Lisa from marketing. Daniel, senior something something. It's like they're organizing a spreadsheet in their head, trying to keep everything neat and labeled before they forget. But you don't really play that game. You hear the names, sure, you catch some of the roles, but your attention goes somewhere else almost immediately. You start noticing who actually has influence, who people naturally turn to when something needs to be decided, who speaks and the room subtly shifts to listen, who talks a lot but no one really reacts to. You're not mapping titles, you're reading behavior. Within minutes, you can feel the structure of the group without anyone explaining it. It's like you're picking up an invisible hierarchy that doesn't show up on org charts. You notice the confident one who barely speaks, but when they do, everyone pays attention. The loud one who fills the silence, but somehow doesn't move anything forward. The quiet connector who keeps conversations flowing behind the scenes. While others are still trying to remember names, you already understand the dynamics. And that gives you a very real advantage. Because when you understand how people actually behave, not just what they're called, you adapt faster. You know who to listen to. You know who to approach. You know when to speak and when to stay quiet. You don't waste time guessing the official structure. You respond to the real one. That makes you incredibly effective in new environments. You can walk into a room and, without effort, adjust your tone, your timing, even your energy to match what's actually going on.
It's like social instinct on autopilot. And in situations where things are unclear or constantly changing, this becomes even more valuable. Because titles don't always reflect reality, but behavior always does. So while others might rely on labels that can be outdated, exaggerated, or just wrong, you're working with live data. You're adapting in real time. Of course, there's a small downside to this approach, because while you're reading the real structure, there is still an official one, and sometimes that matters. You might overlook formal hierarchy because it doesn't match what you're seeing. You might treat people based on how they act, not on what their title says. And most of the time that works in your favor, but occasionally it can create friction. You might underestimate someone who technically has authority, or ignore a title that in certain situations still carries weight, whether it makes sense or not. From your perspective, you're just responding to reality. From theirs, you might seem like you're skipping protocol. Still, when you step back, the pattern is clear. You don't adapt by memorizing positions, you adapt by understanding people. And in a world where behavior matters more than labels most of the time, that's not just useful, it's a serious edge.
The pattern reader. You don't store people as names. That sounds strange at first, but if you really pay attention, it explains a lot. You don't walk away from an interaction thinking, John from work. Your brain doesn't file people like contacts in a phone. Instead, it builds something more alive. You remember patterns. Not John, but the one who pauses before answering, like he's calculating something. The one who gets quieter when something's off, even if no one else notices. The one who laughs quickly, but only when other people laugh first. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it's incredibly consistent. You remember how people behave, not what they're called. And at first, this might feel like a weird trade. Because sure, names are useful. They're clean, simple, easy to access. Meanwhile, patterns are messy. They take time. They don't fit into neat labels. But here's where it starts to pay off. Over time, your brain connects those patterns. It stacks observations. It links moments. It builds a kind of internal model for each person without you even trying. And suddenly, something interesting happens. People become predictable. Not in a boring way, in a readable way. You start to sense how someone will react before they react. You notice the shift in their tone and already know what's coming next. You see the same micro behaviors repeat, and your brain goes, yeah, I've seen this before. It's like watching a show where you already understand the characters deeply. You don't need a big dramatic moment to know who they are. The small details tell you everything. And this gives you a quiet but powerful advantage. You become very good at anticipating behavior. You can tell when someone is about to disagree, even if they're still nodding. You can feel when a conversation is about to turn before the words catch up. You read between the lines, picking up meaning that was never explicitly said. While others take things at face value, you're constantly interpreting what's underneath. That makes you sharper in conversations, better at navigating social situations, and much harder to mislead. Because people can change their words. They can even change their tone. But patterns? Patterns leak the truth, and you're tuned into them. Of course, there's a small downside to this whole system, because while you're holding on to all these rich, detailed patterns, sometimes the situation only asks for one simple thing, a name. And that's where the friction shows up. Someone asks, hey, what's his name again? And your brain goes, okay, he's the one who leans back when he disagrees, speaks slowly, avoids eye contact when pressured. Super useful. Not helpful at all in that moment. It's like having a high-definition video, but struggling to read the title. You know the person, you understand them, you could probably predict their next move, but pulling up the label, that can take a second longer than expected.
And to others, that delay might look like uncertainty, when in reality, it's the opposite. You're not missing information, you're holding more of it than most, just not in the format people expect. And when you zoom out, that trade starts to make sense. You didn't build a system for memorizing names, you built a system for understanding people. And in the long run, that's a much more powerful skill.
The real-time processor. Some people move through conversations like they're recording a video. They capture everything. Names, details, little facts, stored neatly for later playback. You experience conversations like streaming live. There's no recording mode running in the background. No quiet voice saying, remember this, save that, don't forget the name. You're inside the moment, fully engaged, fully present, actually there. While the conversation is happening, your brain isn't focused on archiving it for later. It's using its energy in real time. You're interpreting what's being said, not just hearing it. You're responding naturally, not rehearsing lines in your head. You're adapting to shifts in tone, mood, and direction as they happen. It's fast, fluid, almost automatic. And honestly, that's rare. A lot of people are half present. They're thinking about what to say next, worrying about how they sound, or mentally stepping outside the moment to analyze it. Meanwhile, you are in it. You catch the rhythm of the conversation. You adjust your timing without thinking. You react in a way that feels real, not scripted. It's like the difference between watching a game and actually playing it. And this creates a powerful advantage, because when you're fully present, people feel it. They feel heard. They feel understood. They feel like you're actually connecting with them, not just waiting for your turn to speak. You respond faster, more naturally, and often more accurately because you're working with what's happening right now, not what you stored 5 seconds ago. You pick up on shifts mid-sentence. You adjust when the energy changes. You navigate conversations with a kind of ease that's hard to fake. In fast-moving situations, meetings, social events, new environments, this becomes a huge edge. You don't freeze. You don't overthink. You move with the flow. And while others are busy trying to remember names, roles, or exact wording, you're already 3 steps ahead in understanding the moment. Of course, there's a trade-off, because your brain is optimized for processing, not storing. It's focused on what's useful now, not what might be useful later. So details that aren't actively helping you in the moment, like names, don't always get saved. It's not that you didn't hear them. It's not that you didn't care. It's just that your brain didn't flag them as essential for the task at hand. And later, when someone says, "So what was their name again?" you might pause for a second longer than expected, not because you weren't paying attention, but because you were paying attention to something else, something deeper. To others, that can sometimes look like you missed something obvious, but from your perspective, you didn't miss the moment. You maximized it. You traded a small, simple detail for a richer, more dynamic experience. And when you zoom out, that trade becomes pretty clear. You're not built to store conversations like files. You're built to live them as they happen. And in a world where most people are distracted, half present, or mentally somewhere else, being fully there, that's not a weakness. That's a serious advantage.
The substance over ceremony rule. Names are part of a social ritual. They're like the opening handshake of human interaction. You say your name, I say mine, we both nod like, yes, we are now officially interacting like normal adults. Names signal politeness, recognition, respect. They're small, but socially, they carry weight. But your brain leans towards something else, substance. When you're in a conversation, you're not focused on performing the ritual perfectly. You're focused on what's actually happening underneath it. You care more about what's being said, what's being felt, what actually matters in that moment. You're listening for meaning, not just information. You're paying attention to intention, not just presentation. So while someone else is thinking, don't forget their name, don't forget their name, you're thinking, does this person mean what they're saying? And without realizing it, you make a quiet trade. You let go of the ceremony to hold on to the substance. Because at the end of the day, remembering a name doesn't tell you much about a person, but understanding how they think, how they react, what they value, that tells you everything. And that's where your advantage becomes clear. You naturally go deeper. You don't get stuck in surface-level interactions. You move past small talk faster, not by rushing it, but by tuning into what actually has meaning. People might start a conversation with you expecting something light and forgettable, and suddenly they're talking about something real, because you're present in a different way. You ask better questions without trying. You respond in a way that shows you actually understood, not just heard. You notice emotional undertones that most people skip right over. And when someone feels that, it stands out. In a world where many interactions are quick, polite, and shallow, you create moments that feel genuine, not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you're focused on what's real instead of what's expected. That builds stronger connections over time. People may not always remember exactly what was said, but they remember how they felt in that conversation. And with you, it tends to feel more honest, more grounded, more human. Of course, there's a small friction point, because while you're focused on depth, the world still runs on signals. And for many people, remembering their name is one of those signals. It's a simple way of saying, I see you, I acknowledge you, you matter. So when you forget it, even if unintentionally, it can land the wrong way. It can feel like a lack of attention, or worse, a lack of respect, even if, ironically, you were paying more attention than most. You were just paying attention to something they couldn't see. So sometimes there's a mismatch. You walk away thinking, that was a real conversation. They walk away thinking, do they even remember who I am? And that gap can be confusing. But when you zoom out, your pattern is consistent. You're not wired for perfect social ceremony. You're wired for meaningful interaction. You don't prioritize labels, you prioritize understanding. And while that might occasionally create small misunderstandings, it also creates something far more valuable. You don't just go through conversations, you actually connect.
The reduced label bias. Names do something interesting to the brain. The moment you hear one, it doesn't just sit there quietly. It starts pulling in associations, background, personality, status. A single name can trigger a whole chain of assumptions without you even noticing. You hear it and think, oh, probably this kind of person. Or, yeah, I've met people like that before. It's fast, automatic, and most of the time completely unchecked. For many people, once that label sticks, it starts shaping how they see everything else, how they interpret tone, how they judge behavior, even how much attention they give. But when the name doesn't stick, that whole layer weakens. You're still human, you still form impressions, of course. You're not walking around as some neutral observer with zero bias, but your starting point is different. You rely less on labels and more on direct observation. Instead of filtering someone through a pre-built category, you're watching what they actually do, how they speak, how they react under pressure, how consistent they are over time. You're building your understanding from the ground up, not from a shortcut. And that creates a subtle but powerful advantage, because labels can be misleading. They can oversimplify people. They can lock someone into a box before they've even said a full sentence. They can make you assume patterns that aren't really there. Without relying on those shortcuts as much, you give people more space to show who they actually are. You notice contradictions others might ignore. You catch behaviors that don't match the expected type. You stay open just a little longer, which often leads to a more accurate read. In a way, you're less predictable in your judgments, but more precise over time. You're not rushing to conclusions based on a label, you're collecting evidence. And in a world full of snap judgments, that's a rare skill.
It helps you avoid underestimating people. It helps you avoid overtrusting them too quickly. It keeps your perception flexible instead of fixed. You're not easily influenced by what something seems to be. You're focused on what it actually is. Of course, there's a trade-off here too, because those shortcuts, as imperfect as they are, can be useful. They help people move faster in social situations. They provide quick context, even if it's not always accurate. And since you rely less on them, you might take a bit longer to categorize someone in a simple way. You might not immediately place them into a neat mental box. You might miss some of the quick cues others pick up from names, titles, or backgrounds. From the outside, it can look like hesitation, like you're slower to figure people out. But in reality, you're just using a different method. You're not skipping the process, you're expanding it. You trade speed for depth, shortcuts for accuracy. And while that might cost you a few quick assumptions, it gives you something far more valuable in the long run. A clearer, less distorted view of people. Not based on what they're called, but based on who they actually are.
The visual dominance. You know that moment. Someone walks past you and instantly your brain goes, I know this person. No hesitation, no doubt. It hits fast, like recognition before thought. Maybe it's been years, different hairstyle, different clothes, completely different context. Still, you recognize the face. But then comes the second part. What's their name? And suddenly, nothing. It's right there somewhere, but out of reach, like trying to grab a word that dissolves the moment you get close. So you're left in that classic situation, I know you, I just don't know your name. And it feels slightly ridiculous because the important part, the person, is crystal clear. That's because your brain doesn't treat all information equally. It leans heavily toward visual encoding. Faces are rich, they're detailed, they have structure, patterns, proportions, expressions. Your brain loves that. It can map a face like a landscape. Eyes, angles, micro-expressions, the way someone smiles or frowns. All of that gets stored in a way that's deep and surprisingly durable. That's why you can recognize someone after years, even if everything around them has changed. A face gives your brain something to work with. Now compare that to a name. A name is just a sound, a quick sequence of letters with no built-in meaning, no visual anchor, no emotional texture, at least not at first. It's abstract, and for your brain, abstract information doesn't stick as easily as something visual and structured. So without even realizing it, you prioritize what's easier to encode and retrieve. You lock onto the face and let the name fade into the background. And this creates a very real advantage. Your facial recognition is strong. You don't just recognize people, you recognize them fast, across different environments, different phases of life, different versions of themselves. You might spot someone in a crowd that others would completely overlook. You remember where you saw them, the context, the feeling of that moment. Your spatial memory connects the dots, place, movement, presence. It's like your brain builds a visual map of your experiences, and people are part of that map. That's powerful, because in real life, recognition often matters more than recall. You might not know their name instantly, but you know them. You know you've interacted. You know there's history, even if it takes a second to reload the details. And that awareness helps you navigate social situations smoothly. You're less likely to completely blank on someone, less likely to treat a familiar face like a stranger. You maintain continuity, even without the label. Of course, there's a small downside that comes with this setup, because while your brain is excellent at recognizing faces, the world still runs on names, and sooner or later, someone will expect you to say it. That's when the gap shows up. You smile, you recognize them, you're fully aware of the connection, but the name just isn't there. And from the outside, it can look like uncertainty, when in reality, it's the opposite. You're not unsure about the person, you're just missing the tag. It's like having a high-resolution image without the file name. Still, when you step back, the trade becomes obvious. You didn't lose the important part, you kept the human part. You remember faces, presence, context, things that actually define real interactions.
And in a world where people change, move, and evolve, that kind of memory lasts longer than any name ever could. If you're not subscribed, you'll probably never see us again. But if you are, congratulations, you're growing every day.